Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 102 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk about some Dynasty breakouts. So I've got 12 names here across all four positions, and we're going to go through those guys, and I'll explain why I think they are good players to target for a breakout year in 2026. And the 2026 season is getting closer and closer. We are now approaching August, where redraft leagues will get fired up and the preseason games will kick off. So we are getting closer and closer to real live football once again. So we're back with another episode after a bit of a break here in July. We skipped an episode, so I apologize for that. Just had a lot of things going on in the real world, and I figured, July in general tends to be a little bit of a slower month in terms of football news. So we'll pick up the pace here as we get into the month of August and into the NFL season. But before we get started into the breakouts, I want to remind everyone, as always, make sure that you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it, we're there. Make sure that you are following along so you don't miss any future shows. And find us on social media. We're on Twitter or X at Dynasty War Room. You can find our Facebook page, YouTube channel, all that good stuff. You can find me at Andrew Vcourt as well on the various platforms. So go follow along. Very much appreciate it. And with all of that out of the way, let's move on into today's show with our Dynasty breakouts. So as I mentioned, we have 12 different names, and we're going to go through all of them. I'll explain my reasons. And generally, when it comes to defining a breakout candidate, I typically will say that it shouldn't be a rookie. I think that's a little bit unfair to say, oh, this rookie that was drafted high is going to have a breakout first season. I think in general, everyone has an idea of who those players could be. And then I tend to have it where I want this upcoming season to be their best season to date. So it doesn't mean that they won't have another season in the future that's better than 2026, but just in general that 2026 will be this player's best season to date. So that's how I typically go about this. There's a little bit of crossover here between my buys that I did earlier in the summer. There's a couple names here that were mentioned on that show as well, but definitely a lot of new names here too. And so we want to jump into that and give you an idea of what players maybe some could be flying under the radar. Some are hot names that I think are pretty popular right now among the Dynasty community. But we're going to get into those names and see which ones, who I believe will be a breakout for this upcoming year. So let's start at the QB position. And I actually only have one quarterback that I really think fits the bill for this year. I know there is a handful of names out there that have been popular, but for me, the one that really stands out is going to be Tyler Shuck from the New Orleans Saints. He is currently valued as the QB 18 on Keep Trade Cut, and he is 26 years old, older for a second-year player in the league. But he is a guy with the New Orleans Saints where he got hot at the end of the season, and I do tend to fall in love with those types of rookies where they start a little bit slow, things pick up, and then they have a monster end to the season. And we've seen a lot of good things from players that do that over the years. And Tyler Shuck is a guy where, number one, he plays for Kellen Moore, so a good offensive-minded head coach who was able to put together a solid offense despite pretty mediocre weapons as a whole last year with the Saints. And this year, the situation is better around him. So Jordan Tyson, first-round pick at wide receiver, gets paired up with Chris Olave, and Travis Achan, or formerly known Travis Etienne, is also now on the New Orleans Saints, paired up with Alvin Kamara. So a pretty good surrounding cast. Juwan Johnson's still there at tight end. They drafted Oscar Delp, and the offensive line is solid. So it's an overall pretty good group in New Orleans. It's a softer division, so it's going to be something where the Saints are playing a lot of competitive games. And I think the arrow is pointing up for Tyler Shuck. I think he's going to have a nice second year in the NFL. I think he will solidify himself as the New Orleans Saints starting quarterback for the foreseeable future. And for New Orleans to be able to land that, where they did in the draft without having to burn, an early first-round pick or something like that on him, is a good move for the franchise. So I think that everything is looking up for New Orleans, and I am intrigued by the offense. And I don't know that their defense is anything to write home about, which should also lend itself to some better offensive production, with the team potentially having to play some catch-up. So overall, I think Tyler Shuck is the quarterback that for me is going to be my breakout pick. Another popular name that is, the hot name, which makes a lot of sense given that he was the number 1 overall pick last year, but Cam Ward from the Titans is a popular guy. I think the conditions are right for Cam Ward. I think you could put him on breakout watch, but I don't feel confident enough I wasn't impressed enough by his play down the stretch last year to where I am just banging the table for Cam Ward to be, the next best thing. The conditions are there. He certainly could, but I'm not ready to go ahead and put him on this list. So for me, Tyler Shuck over Cam Ward for 2026. So let's move on over to the running backs. And I have 3 names here that I want to discuss. So we will go in order from the highest valued on Keep Trade Cut to the lowest valued, and give you my thoughts. So the first name is going to be Cam Skattebo, running back 18 on Keep Trade Cut. The New York Giants drafted him in the 4th round a couple years ago, and after a pretty hot start, a great start really. He was showing 3-down capability. He looked like a fantasy stud. He then suffered a gruesome injury to his knee, to his leg. He missed the rest of the season last year. Has been recovering. We all saw the whole backflip stunt on social media recently, which is a little bit scary if you're a Skattebo manager, but it seems fine. And I like his place in the Giants offense. There were all these rumors about New York being interested in getting Jeremiah Love or signing a top-tier free agent, and they didn't do either. They really didn't do anything at all at the running back position, so it's going to be Skattebo and Tracy again at the position. And John Harbaugh takes over. He loves to run the ball. And so I think that Cam Skattebo is going to be lined up for a pretty heavy workload. We know that he can catch the ball. He was a true 3-down workhorse in college at Arizona State. So I am very much intrigued by him. I think that the Giants offense can take a big step forward. I'm a huge Malik Neighbors guy. And Jackson Dart showed a lot of potential last year as well. So Cam Skattebo, at age 24, I think that he is somebody that could take a nice big step into being a really reliable fantasy running back in 2026. The next guy on the list is going to be Bashal Tutin from the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he is currently the running back 22 on Keep Trade Cut. He's only 23 years old, and he, just like Skattebo, was a 4th-round pick in not this past year, but the year before that NFL draft. And he is a guy that should fully take over the Travis Etienne role in Jacksonville. So he is a big speed guy. He can play all 3 downs. He can catch the ball. And he had some solid moments in flashes last year, although it was pretty much a workhorse role for Travis Etienne. So it was not something where Tutin got a ton of work. But the Jacksonville offense, very impressive. Trevor Lawrence took the next step. The new coaching staff with Liam Cohen really, did the trick there and got that offense rolling. So Tutin has a ton of opportunity. The coaching staff has really raved about him this offseason. He was somebody I liked coming out as a rookie, and I think that the ceiling is sky high. I mean, if he fully takes over that role in that backfield, he could easily end up as a low-end RB1, and he's not going to cost you anywhere near that price tag to acquire. Now, the thorn in his side could be Chris Rodriguez, who signed a nice contract over there in free agency with Jacksonville. So it remains to be seen what kind of workload he gets. It is very possible that Rodriguez could siphon some of that goal line work, which even if Tutin is handling the majority of the work, between the 20s, it comes into, play where Rodriguez puts a bit of a cap on Tutin's overall ceiling, and I don't think that's going to be the case with somebody like Cam Skattebo, which is why I would have him ranked higher. But Tutin still is going to be able to catch some passes. He still should get some of the goal line work, depending on the role that Rodriguez has, and it should be a very high-powered offense. So I think given all those factors combined with his young age and the draft capital that was solid, if it wasn't elite, but it was solid in the 4th round, I do think that Tutin's going to get a lot of work. And worst case scenario, you're looking at a solid 1A, 1B situation between Tutin and Rodriguez, where Tutin does have a usable fantasy season and can be a flex play for you. And that would still, of course, top his rookie season. So I think we're definitely going to see a breakout there for Bechel Tutin. Now, the third guy on this list is somebody that I'm a little bit less confident about, but the offseason hype for this player has been going off the charts. He was drafted very high. He was drafted to be a stud running back, and that's going to be Jonathan Brooks from the Carolina Panthers, coming off of multiple pretty gruesome injuries, and he is back to being valued as the RB27 on Keep Trade Cut, ahead of Chuba Hubbard, which I think is a little bit crazy, but I suppose I can see why, given the age difference. He's only age 23, so he's still a very young player despite the multiple missed seasons due to injury. And Jonathan Brooks, again, drafted very high, 2nd round pick for Carolina, was a do-it-all back, kind of somebody that was thought of to be very similar in nature to an Aaron Jones, where he could both run and receive and give you some good goal line work, be a threat in the passing game. So Jonathan Brooks is going to an offense in Carolina where they're going to run the ball. We saw last year with Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard, they really ran the ball a lot. Rico Dowdle ended up taking over the majority of that role after Hubbard got hurt. But Hubbard did sign a good deal there a couple years ago. He is back. He's going to probably start the year as the 1A, whereas Brooks will be the 1B. But if there's another injury to Chuba, or simply Brooks looks like the 2nd round pick that they drafted, we could see that shift, and I think Jonathan Brooks could end up taking over as the lead back by the end of the year. So definitely much more risky. I don't necessarily love the price tag as running back 27, but it seems like people are really buying into the hype, and the conditions are very much there. And, it would be something where it should be an improved offense. Obviously, Tet McMillan is there. Jalen Coker, I think, is somebody that will have a very nice season as the wide receiver 2. They added a Chris Brazzell. There is Bryce Young now getting deeper and deeper into his career, and what should be a kind of a prove-it year for him. He's going to really have to play well. So, again, similar to Tyler Shuck with, mediocre division, should be in some, a lot of competitive games. This was a playoff team last year. So Jonathan Brooks, the conditions are certainly there for him to have a nice breakout season, which, in fairness, isn't saying a lot since he hasn't done literally anything in the NFL so far. But I do think that he can give you some solid fantasy value here in 2026. All right, so let's move on over to the wide receivers. This is where I have kind of the meat of this episode. I got 5 different names, so a little bit lighter, especially at quarterback, but wide receiver definitely has a lot of names that are intriguing, and I think I could have even picked out several more, but in an effort not to turn this into a 2-hour show, we're going to keep it to 5 names to keep things brief, hit the guys that I really think can make an impact this year. And we're going to start with a name that I've probably mentioned a ton over the course of this year on this podcast. And I imagine we're going to hear his name in another big episode in August as we get closer to the season. But Emeka Egbuka, Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver. He's wide receiver 10 on Keep Trade Cut. So he is definitely being valued very high right now. He's only 23 years old. And Egbuka is somebody where it's sort of the inverse from what we saw from Tyler Shuck and, think Amon-Ra St. Brown when he came out as a rookie where, slower start and then incredible finish. Egbuka was the opposite. He was incredible start, mediocre finish. And I do think a lot of that has to do with an injury that he suffered. He was definitely banged up and he was not the same player in the second half of the season. And so I am fully buying into that narrative that he is closer to the player we saw at the beginning of the year than the end of the year. And I don't know if he's necessarily going to be that elite all the time, especially right out of the gate. But as long as he is at least in the middle or on the side closer to the hot start he had last year, he's going to be an elite wide receiver for fantasy football. He should be able to give you, a low-end wide receiver 1 season. And Mike Evans is gone. So we've talked about that. Baker Mayfield is due for a bounce back season. He struggled a bit and had some of his own injuries last year. So I think there were just a lot of things that kind of went wrong for Tampa. And if the health is there, the quarterback situation remains stable. I know that the Tampa is working on a long-term deal with Baker. So we'll see if that gets done before the season or not. But Egbuka, again, former first-round pick. He was a good player in college, coming from that wide receiver factory in Ohio State. And I'm a believer. I'm in. I'm committed. I am fine with his wide receiver 10 value on Keep Trade Cut, even though that does seem a little high. I think he's that good of a player. I think he is somebody that in a PPR format, especially, he is somebody that you're going to be able to lock into your lineup, long term. So Chris Godwin is still there. I do think there will definitely be some competition. It wouldn't shock me if Godwin actually has a pretty good year, but there's going to be enough passing yardage to go around for Godwin and for Egbuka to both be good fantasy options. So if you want, a buy low option or somebody, obviously then Godwin is somebody that would fit into that. But for today's show, where we're talking breakouts, I think Egbuka is going to have a true, high-level season that we can mark as a breakout. That'll be his best season, granted, in 2 years, and will be a wide receiver 1 for fantasy football. Another guy that I think absolutely has the possibility of being a wide receiver 1 for fantasy football that has really failed to live up to expectations is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. So Arizona Cardinals wide receiver. He was top 5 pick a few years ago. He's the wide receiver 25. He has really been a disappointment so far in his career. He's been outshone by Malik Neighbors, the quarterbacks that went in that draft class. This was a guy that was being billed as the guy. I mean, think Jeremiah Smith, almost. I don't know. I think Jeremiah Smith is probably in a whole different, category, but the only player that in recent memory comes to mind as being talked up as, hey, this guy's the true stud. He can't miss. Marvin Harrison was that guy. And I refuse to believe that he's just going to fizzle away into being some average, wide receiver 2 on his own team. I think he can be a good fantasy weapon. And at age 24, Jacoby Brissett, and Marvin Harrison did have a pretty good connection in the very limited time that they had on the field together. Injuries were a problem last year. I do side with Marvin Harrison over Michael Wilson, and obviously Trey McBride is going to get a lot of targets too, but Marvin Harrison Jr. is due for a breakout. I think he finally gets it done, and whether that comes in as a low-end wide receiver 1 or a mid to high-end wide receiver 2, I think that fantasy managers would be pretty happy with a top 20 season out of Marvin Harrison Jr. given the mediocre production that we've gotten so far. But I do think that he is someone that has that really high ceiling, whereas a lot of other players, it's like, oh yeah, they could have a good year. They could help my team and be a flex player. They could improve on their draft position, but very few players have the type of ceiling where they could really end up as a true wide receiver 1, a top 5, top 10 type of player. And Marvin Harrison Jr., even if we don't think he's going to be a top 5 guy, absolutely has it in his range of outcomes to be a top 10, top 12, top 15 player at the position. And so I'm still believing, I'm still on board the hype train for Marvin Harrison Jr., and he is going to be the wide receiver number 2 on this list of breakouts. All right, so let's shift on over to another former first-round pick that has been disappointing throughout his career, and that's going to be LA Chargers wide receiver. I almost said San Diego. Quentin Johnston, wide receiver number 36 on Keep Trade Cut. He is 24 years old, although he's about to turn 25, so he'll be 25 right there at the beginning of the season. And Quentin Johnston is suddenly kind of in a pretty good spot with the Chargers. The offensive line should be significantly improved. Mike McDaniel is coming over from Miami to lead that offense. And Keenan Allen, not with the team. Now, of course, this is all TBD, or, could change, subject to change, I guess is the proper phrase. If Keenan Allen does re-sign, I think that would throw a big wrench into the ceilings for a lot of the Chargers wide receivers. But Quentin Johnston, I think, is a guy that right now, as it stands, should be a starter in 2 wide receiver sets. He's going to be on the outside. He's going to be able to utilize his yak ability. That's something that the McDaniel offense does rely on a lot. He's got good speed. And he actually had a pretty solid season last year. He was usable. He had some really nice games. And, that was in sort of a wide receiver 3 capacity for this team. So if he bumps into more of that wide receiver 2 role, stays ahead of Trey Harris, I think that there is a pretty good ceiling for Quentin Johnston to be, even as high as a wide receiver 2 for fantasy. So Johnston, despite, the rough rookie year, the bit of a slow, build up here, some of the drop issues that he's had, he has gotten better. So I do think that we could be in for a career year for Quentin Johnston. We're in that range now where, you tend to see those breakout seasons for a receiver when you get into year 3, year 4, etc. And so Quentin Johnston, to me, is a guy that is worth buying. I think that at a wide receiver 36 price tag, I think that's extremely fair and is something that I'm generally willing to pay. And so Quentin Johnston, that LA offense, not San Diego. It is insane that they're in LA. They're always going to be San Diego in my heart. But nevertheless, I'm a believer in that offense. And, Justin Herbert, I think, has built some trust with Johnston. And I'm very intrigued by the new offensive system, getting rid of Greg Roman for McDaniel. So Quentin Johnston is going to be the 3rd receiver on this list. And it wouldn't shock me if he breaks 1,000 yards. So he can be a touchdown guy. He can really capitalize. I think he can give you some big plays, downfield threat. So Quentin Johnston is going to be the 3rd receiver again on my breakout list. All right, so let's shift gears into more of a pure slot receiver and talk about another guy that I think maybe I was a year early on, and that's going to be Josh Downs, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. He is the wide receiver 40 on Keep Trade Cut. He's 25 years old, and another situation where, a guy that was getting a ton of targets is moving on. So Michael Pittman is gone. He's out in Pittsburgh now, and that opens the door for Josh Downs to really be the true underneath guy, the second target in the offense at the wide receiver spot. Tyler Warren is still going to be a bit of a thorn in Downs' side, but Alec Pierce is more of a pure deep threat. He got paid the big bucks and will definitely get an increase in his targets. But Michael Pittman did get a lot of underneath, short to mid-range area of the field. And I do think that Downs can really capitalize on that. This pick really relies on his quarterback, Daniel Jones, maintaining his health, getting back on the field, being ready to go after his big injury last year. So we'll see exactly how that shakes out. But if the quarterback situation is ready and set and he is healthy and good to go, then Josh Downs should be in line for a very nice season with Daniel Jones as his QB. So, we were high on him last year. We hyped him up, and then that did not work out at all. We figured that there would be another option in the passing game behind Michael Pittman, but that ended up being Pierce instead of Downs. So this year, maybe with Pittman out of the mix, maybe we can finally hit on Josh Downs and he gets his true breakout year. And what could be a pretty good offense, even losing Pittman. I mean, having Pierce, Downs, and then Tyler Warner, that's 3 really good weapons in the passing game. And then you have one of the best running backs in the league in Jonathan Taylor. So, signs are the arrow is pointing up for the Colts as well. So Josh Downs, number 4 on this list. All right, now we're going to jump way down the list. So we're going to jump, if you're talking a true bottom of the barrel guy that's been sitting on your bench or even on waivers and could come out of nowhere to have a nice big breakout season, I want to direct your attention to Jalen Nailor, wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders, who is the wide receiver 76 on Keep Trade Cut. He's 27 years old, joins the Raiders after some time with the Minnesota Vikings, and Nailor is somebody that got a much larger than expected contract in my eyes as a free agent to go to Vegas. He was like the guy that they identified as, hey, Jalen Nailor is going to be he's the key cog of our offense that's missing. And so they went out and they spent a bunch of money to bring him in. And, he really didn't do a whole lot in Minnesota. He had a couple, solid performances, some decent depth, value on your bench, but he was never really a guy that you were starting unless you really needed to. There were a bunch of bye weeks, some injuries ahead of Nailor with Addison and Jefferson and whatnot. So this is a bit of a new scenario because there's hardly any competition for the Raiders wide receiver spots. I mean, it's a bunch of nobodies. It's a collection of guys that have not done it. Jack Besh is there, a former second-round pick. Maybe he could break out. Trey Tucker had one big game. There's Dante Thornton, who's more of a field stretcher, deep threat. It's not exactly a very threatening room of receivers. The real number one receiver there, of course, is Brock Bowers, who I think will be a monster. But somebody's got to catch some passes on the outside as well, and it can't just be Bowers. So Jalen Nailor, I think, with the money and his veteran experience in the league, has a chance to really be the number one wide receiver for Las Vegas. And whether it's Kirk Cousins for some or a majority of the year and then gives way to Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback situation should be better. I mean, it can't really get a whole lot worse than last year, but Jalen Nailor is going to walk into a lot of opportunity. So is he the most talented guy, in the world or anything like that? No, this isn't somebody that I'm necessarily projecting to turn into some fantasy mainstay. But if you are looking for a really low-level guy that you can grab, in a redraft league with your last pick, or somebody again you can look for off waivers or target as a piece of fodder in a larger dynasty trade, Jalen Nailor would fit into that category, and I'm all for taking a shot on these guys where you can end up with really high volume of targets for a cheap price in what's kind of a big question mark of an offense. We know that things were bad last year, so if he goes and things are bad again, you're not paying a lot to get him. You're the trade-offs, you're not losing much for going out and acquiring Jalen Nailor. So, so that's why I think he is a good fit. And he's still in his prime too. He's only 27 years old, so he's not some washed-up guy, at age 31 like me. This is a guy that still very much could have some solid production in the NFL. And so Jalen Nailor is going to be my last wide receiver on my list for 2026 breakouts. All right, so let's move on to the tight ends. And I've got three names here that I want to talk about. And the first one is, a huge name already for Dynasty. So it's sort of an interesting pick because Colston Loveland, tight end number 3 overall on Keep Trade Cut. And he plays, of course, for the Chicago Bears. He's only 22 years old. And at tight end 3, he's being drafted there, both in redraft and in Dynasty. And he's being drafted there for good reason. I mean, he was an absolute stud to finish out the regular season and then had a great postseason run with the Bears. So the hype is well-deserved for Colston Loveland. I've been a huge proponent of Colston Loveland on this show. I had him pretty high in my rookie rankings the year he came out. I had him ahead of Tyler Warren, who I still very much like. It was never a one or the other. It was always both, but Loveland first. And Colston Loveland, to me, will be the leading receiver for the Chicago Bears this year. I know that Luther Burden is primed for a breakout year. He's a popular name for a list like this. Rome Odunze, same thing. But Colston Loveland, to me, feels like the safest bet, and he can give you the biggest impact for fantasy football, given that he's at the tight end position, especially if you are in a tight end premium league. So Colston Loveland is a name that I think can give you what he gave you at the end of the year, but for the entire season. And he could really put himself in the mix with the Trey McBride, Brock Bowers of the world. Will he reach the level of those two? I'm not quite sure of that, just given that there are other, mouths to feed. Whereas, The other two, it's very, very clear that they're the number one options. But Colson Loveland absolutely can solidify himself as the third tight end, put him into that elite tier, and I'm sticking to my guns on Colson Loveland being a stud for fantasy, and fully am expecting a big breakout season from him this year. The next guy on the list is going to be Dalton Kincaid from the Buffalo Bills. So he's the tight end 13 on Keep Trade Cut, and he's 26 years old. Dalton Kincaid is somebody that was also a former first-round pick, has never really lived up to the hype. He's had a lot of injury problems. He's been taken off the field for his poor blocking. And then Josh Allen has just always spread the ball around. So it's never been, really a great situation for Kincaid to become this elite upper echelon fantasy tight end. But there is a little bit of reason, I think, to hope for this year. Number one is his health. He was clearly banged up. He's been missing time the last couple seasons, and he opted for rehab instead of getting surgery, which maybe would have been the smarter route, probably would feel a little bit better, but he's trying to get back on the field through rehab only for the second straight off season. So reportedly he is doing much better. He's back to full strength. And so if that's the case, there's no Stephon Diggs, there's no clear number one. I mean, obviously DJ Moore should be the clear number one, but there's room for Dalton Kincaid to be a high-level fantasy tight end. He just needs to stay on the field, and obviously if he could improve a little on his blocking so he doesn't get taken off the field all the time, that would be great too. But he is a high-level pass catcher. He just needs to maintain the health, stay on the field, and things could be there for him this year. It's kind of a make or break year in my mind for Dalton Kincaid, because if he can't put it together this year, if he can't stay healthy, at this point, I'll just have moved on. I'll be ready to just focus on other people altogether, and the Bills might be as well. So should be a huge, huge year for Dalton Kincaid, and I think he is primed for that breakout. So Dalton Kincaid, the next tight end on the list. All right, now the final player on this list is going to be Gunnar Helm, tight end 21 on Keep Trade Cut from the Tennessee Titans, and he's 23, about to turn 24. So when the season begins, or right there at the beginning of the year, he'll be 24, and he is the one guy on the Titans offense that, to me, it's very clear that he has a nice opportunity for takeoff. Chig Okonkwo went off to Washington, and so Gunnar Helm, who had a pretty nice rookie year as it was for a later round tight end, now becomes a clear starter. It's a whole new staff, new offensive system, Cam Ward in year 2. They added Carnell Tate. So the offense could be significantly better, or at least improved upon last year with a lot more opportunity. And so Gunnar Helm would be the beneficiary of all that. Even if Carnell Tate becomes the true number one, which I think is what we all expect, it could be a solid offense. And so regardless if the team itself is that much improved in terms of where it is in the standings, because I do expect them to be, relatively mediocre, Gunnar Helm should get a lot of volume. He certainly is going to have the opportunity to improve on his tight end 21 value as it stands. And I do love these, second and third year breakouts for players. I think that's when you can really get the big impact, especially in Dynasty. And so Gunnar Helm on this list as my final breakout tight end. All right, so that's my 12 names for this show. At tight end, Colson Loveland, Dalton Kincaid, and Gunnar Helm. At wide receiver, Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr., Quentin Johnston, Josh Downs, and Jalen Naylor. At running back, Cam Scattaboo, Bayshell Tootin, Jonathan Brooks, and then Tyler Shuck at quarterback. So hopefully this information and my picks for today help you out in your leagues as we get closer and closer to the NFL season. And we will be a little bit more regular with our schedule here, getting into August and closer to the football season. So again, I apologize for the big delay here in July, but just needed a little break, and we're back and ready to go. And we're going to have some Dynasty busts coming up on our next show. And then we'll get into things like my guys and some big, bold predictions for the season. as we approach September. So thank you all very much for tuning in and listening. My name is Andrew Valancourt, and you've been listening to the Dynasty War Room podcast.